Welcome into the Awesemo.com NASCAR live before lock shows. We're here to get your A for today's Geico 500 there in Talladega. So super speedway racing here today. Of course, we are sponsored by Prize Picks. Later on in the show, we'll talk about some of the props that they have over at Prize Picks today for today's NASCAR race. As always, here on the Awesemo NASCAR live before lock, I'm joined by Chris Pennell. Chris, always great to be talking with you, talking about super speedway racing. And so let's just kind of get right into this. This is once again stack the back. There's not a lot of only 131 dominator points available to today. So this is all about stacking the back, place differential, as opposed to looking for those dominators.
Yeah, what's up, Jason? Looking forward to talking about Talladega today, one of my absolute favorite tracks in all of NASCAR, not only for DFS purposes, because there's a ton of strategy to it, but just very entertaining to watch. I know a lot of NASCAR races can get kind of boring, but Talladega is pretty action-packed for the most part, and it's going to be a fun one today. And yes, stack the back. While popular, it is a proven winning strategy at Talladega.
Expect chaos, expect wrecks. It's going to happen. Another thought process with that is, don't be trying to spend every piece of your salary, especially in these type of tracks. I mean, what was it, Daytona beginning of the year? I want to say the optimal DK salary was 39 and change.
Yeah, it definitely left a lot of money on the table. I could pull it up, but I won't waste your guys' time. But I can tell you right now, money was left on the table. And we were running some simulations last night on my end, and it looks like around $3,000 to $5,000 was a really popular range as far as being optimal for this weekend's race.
Yes, and of course, we mentioned about stack the back in terms of this one, focusing on place differential. But, another thing that, and we'll get into these drivers later on, but avoiding the front row, I know, is also a game theory for you today.
Yeah, I am planning on having absolutely 0% of Christopher Bell and Martin Truex Jr. There's just not enough laps. The fast stops are completely random, and there's too many lead changes for these guys to end up being in the optimal lineup. And we've seen in the past where the guy starting in the pole ended up winning the race, and they're still not in the optimal. There's just not enough place differential for them to pay off. While you can still cash with them in your lineup, you're just not going to take down a tournament.
Of course, if you got any questions, you can line those up there in the YouTube chat. Also, I've got our Discord chat up and going as well, so you can send me a message in Discord as well. We'll get to your questions as we do go forward. So let's get right into the salaries of these drivers, talk about the upper tier salaries. So we'll look at the drivers who are above 9,000 over on DraftKings. So we got Ryan Blaney, Joey Logano, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Tyler Reddick, William Byron, Kyle Busch, Alex Bowman, and Denny Hamlin. So let's start right off the top here with Ryan Blaney, who is going to be a popular play. He is the most expensive driver over on both slates, 10,500 DraftKings, 14,000 over on FanDuel. I mean, look, there's a lot to love with Ryan Blaney today.
Yeah, I mean, I got the Blaney shirt on today. I'm riding my boy. It's just hard not to like him. I mean, he's arguably the best super speedway racer as of right now. Him, Denny Hamlin, Joey Logano, Keselowski, all up there, but he has just been absolutely excellent at grabbing good finishes. I mean, he's got 7 top 10s the past 11 races, which at very high variance tracks, he's been pretty good at keeping it clean for the majority of the time. And now that he's starting mid-packish, he offers you a lot of place differential as well. And I will say, I don't normally roster drivers starting mid-pack in cash games, but I am making an exception for Ryan Blaney today. Just too good at super speedways for me to ignore. Talladega, great track for him. Got a lot of PD. I know he's expensive, but salary doesn't really matter too much today, so it's not that hard to fit him in.
I guess the question's got to be, because there's going to be people who are going to look at the ownership projection on him, and it's particularly if they're playing in these massive field GPPs, the thought process got to be is, okay, do I want to be around ownership? Do I want to be above? Do I maybe want to be a little less? But obviously a way to differentiate yourself would be to get away from him. But, I think we both like him today.
Yeah, I certainly understand the case. I think there's better plays to be underweight on than Ryan Blaney that we will talk about in a little bit. I'm personally pretty close to the field just because I know he does offer you a lot of place differential, but it's not like he's starting in the 30s where there's barely any downside. Starting mid-pack, that's a dangerous spot. And we saw this with Joey Logano for the Daytona 500, who's a very similar driver to Ryan Blaney at Super Speedways, who had a ton of ownership starting around 20th place. He ended up wrecking and killing your day. So but while Ryan Blaney looks good on paper, looks good in all the numbers, there's still downside for him.
And something I will mention, as of right now, the only issue in terms of text issues. Landon Castle failed 3 times. He'll have a pass through. We'll keep you updated if anything does change on that. Of course, green flag here. Just in a little over an hour from now, 3:20 p.m. each time. Of course, we'll be here till 3 o'clock, and that'll give you plenty of time to adjust whatever lineups you may have, whether you're playing GPPs, cash, tournaments, whatever it may be. Next up, we got Joey Logano. He's starting 13th. 10,300 DraftKings, 13,500 over on FanDuel. I know this is another driver that definitely interests you in tournaments.
Yeah, he made the list on the tournament article that I wrote yesterday. And while I do think he's going to have some pretty high ownership for a guy starting inside the top 15, he still has a lot of interest for me just because he's kind of your direct pivot off of Ryan Blaney. The problem with him is, while he's excellent at Talladega, he's actually averaging the most laps led per race here. I mean, driver ratings, top of the chart. Great driver, but he seems to find himself in the mess a lot more often than Ryan Blaney, and starting about 10 spots higher up, obviously inherent risk. But if I had to pick someone to win this race, Joey Logano is right up there with guys like Blaney and Hamlin. So I do like getting some pieces to Logano in tournaments, but his starting spot does make it a little bit tougher, but that's what makes him a good tournament play.
Of course, be sure to smash that like button right here on YouTube. That does help us out a ton. Of course, if you're not subscribed to Awesemo right here on YouTube, do that so you can stay up to date with everything we have going on in terms of live shows. Of course, it is a busy time in sports right now. MLB is starting, NHL's playoffs are right around the corner, NBA playoffs are currently going on, so we got a ton of action for you. So be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you know when a show is live here on the channel. Next up, we've got a man who is starting 5th, Kyle Larson, 10,100 on DraftKings, 10,200 on FanDuel, but yeah, no one really likes him today.
No, that's not usually something you say about Kyle Larson, because most weeks always going to be very popular, but for a good reason today. He is bad at super speedways. I am planning on Xing him out. I have 0% Kyle Larson, and I feel good about it. I mean, if looking at Talladega numbers, he's averaging -17 DraftKings points per race, an average finish of 35th, a running position of 25th, and not even one top 20. It's been a bad time for Kyle Larson at super speedways. Excellent racer, but he just tends to have a lot of bad luck here. And starting in 5th, there's no real upside. I can't see him winning this race. Even then, if you're playing Kyle Larson, you pretty much have to have him win. And I don't think that the percent chances of that happening is worth even rostering him today.
Let's just say a little teaser for later on the show. Kyle Larson's going to come up when we talk about the prize picks props. So just so you know, a little old school radio term for me. Throw that teaser out coming up a little later on the show. We'll talk about him. Now, someone that is going to be popular today is Chase Elliott. He is starting 28th, 9,900 on DraftKings, 12,500 on FanDuel. So that starting position, meets that stack to back mentality we have today.
Yeah, so Chase Elliott, one of the best drivers in NASCAR, starting in the back, and he's also really good at Talladega. He's a recent race winner here. He's got 2 top 5s, 3 top 10s, and actually one of the better lap leaders here at Dega. So when you mix it all in together and a pretty nice price point below 10K, it makes sense that Elliott is going to be the chalk today. If you're playing cash games, he's a no-brainer. Plug him in. In tournaments, I still think he's a good play, but you also have to ask yourself the leverage that you can get if he happens to wreck. Like, while he looks amazing on paper today, anybody and everybody has an equal chance of getting into a wreck. And it might not even be Chase Elliott's fault. I mean, if he's riding up front, someone can easily get turned and he just happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. We've seen that many, many times at super speedways, and no one is safe. So while Elliott's a great play, just don't go overboard because we have a lot of variance at this track.
Yeah, I know you talked about that earlier this week. I'm like, he could not even be involved in the wreck, but all of a sudden he's on the low end of the track, the car at the top of the track, and you're just taken out. I mean, it's that's one of these things about this type of race. Is just like we said, expect chaos. It's going to happen. Tyler Reddick, he is starting 10th, 9,700 on DraftKings, 8,300 on FanDuel. I know I heard you talk a little bit about him, and I think that your opinion of Tyler Reddick, I think, is the same kind of opinion a lot of people have of him today for DFS.
Yeah, Reddick's interesting because we know he's got a lot of upside, and we know the talent that Tyler Reddick has, but that 10th place starting spot is really hard to get to. He's not going to be super high owned today. I mean, some people will play him just because it's Tyler Reddick and he's been awesome this year, but just have a couple of top 10s at Talladega. But I don't see a lot of upside here. If you're looking at the past the race at super speedways, he's an aggressive kind of driver, and aggressive drivers can either hit really well at super speedways or they could get to the very bottom of the finishing order at the end of the day. I mean, 20th at Atlanta, 35th at Daytona earlier this year, and then 39th at the most recent race at Talladega. So I think he's okay to get to like a sprinkle of in tournaments, but certainly not a staple of my lineups today.
I mentioned a question that came in a little while ago from Jay Lopez. How much is too much Blaney? Because I feel like for multi-entry players, that is going to be the question.
So he is going to be pretty high owned today. So it depends on if you want to get over the field or under the field. I'm personally in the upper 30s as far as my ownership. Like I love Blaney today, but at the same time, you have to factor in there's a lot of risk with everybody today. And it's not like he's in the very back. So I'm in the upper 30s, and that's probably going to be kind of around the range where he comes in for tournaments today.
Next up, we've got William Byron. He is starting in the 8th position, 9,600 DraftKings, 10,500 over there on FanDuel. Kind of, same general ownership, whether we're talking about DraftKings or FanDuel, but obviously somebody that's, not going to be one of the popular plays.
Yeah, William Byron's interesting. I'm kind of viewing him as a somewhat similar play to Tyler Reddick. I will say Byron did win the most recent super speedway race we had, which was at Atlanta, kind of a makeshift super speedway. The thing with Byron is he is either like top 5 or dead last. So if we're looking at his recent finishes, first, like I just said, but then 38th for the 500, 36th at Talladega, 38th at Daytona again, then 2nd at Talladega last year, then 26th again at Daytona. So if William Byron finishes the race, decent chance he's in the top 5. Other than that, he's probably going to be at the very bottom. So you got to be careful with that starting spot of 8th, but he's not going to be very high owned. And we know Byron has been excellent this year. If he can kind of keep it up front, lead some laps, he's going to have to probably win the race or finish P2 to be optimal. But I think there's at least a slim chance of that. So I'm getting a little bit of a sprinkle in tournaments.
Next up, we've got a driver who's starting in the 12th position. That'd be Kyle Busch. He's 9,400 on DraftKings, 11,000 over on FanDuel. That number 12 is kind of a key number for me because of the way I set my groups up in Fantasy Cruncher for today. So I had one group that is 1 through 12. Another group I have is anyone 6K and below. And setting how I wanted to kind of, as I'm trying to develop lineups. So what's your thoughts about Kyle Busch today?
It's kind of similar to William Byron and Tyler Reddick, and I hate to keep repeating myself, but when they're all starting so close to each other, and they're all kind of in the same aspect where they tend to run well, but they all have some pretty bad luck. Like Kyle Busch, whether you look at Talladega or the super speedways in general, he has one of the best average running positions. Like he's able to run up front, but his finishes have been absolutely terrible. So for Busch, he's averaging 6.6 DraftKings points per race at super speedways, an average finish of 25.3, despite a running position of 12.8. And no top 5s, 1 top 10, only 2 top 15. So I think for a good chunk of the race, Kyle Busch is going to be looking like a good play. But at the end of the day, he seems to always have bad luck and wreck out. So not super high on Kyle, but the starting 12th gives me a little bit more upside compared to Byron and Reddick. So I'm just a little bit more exposed to him.
Denny Hamlin, before you get to Denny Hamlin, we get to Alex Bowman, who's starting 27th. He is obviously someone that people are going to be looking at because of that PD potential there. 9,200 on DraftKings. 8,000 over there on FanDuel.
Yeah, he's another cash game staple for me. I actually do think he's a decent spot to be underweight on in tournaments. Just looking at some of my leverage scores as far as being optimal and whatnot, it looks like he's a bit over-owned today. And that's not to say he's a bad play. It's just the ownership he's pulling in. There's other similar plays that I think maybe getting more to is a better idea in tournaments. But if you're playing cash games, cash game lock, doesn't really have to do much to pay off, especially over on FanDuel. He is only $8,000. Really hard to get away from him over there, but obviously he's still kind of cheap over on DraftKings at $9,200. And while he's kind of similar to Byron, where he wrecks a lot at super speedways, his most recent race at Talladega, he ended up finishing 38th, and William Byron was 36th. These are two guys that are no strangers to finishing at the bottom at Talladega. It was also 38th in the other most recent Talladega race, but similar to Byron, when he's not wrecking, he's contending for top 10s, and he also has 4 top 10s the past 11 races at super speedways. So playing cash games, like Bowman in tournaments, just a little bit underweight.
The other driver that's above 9,000 today is Denny Hamlin. He's starting 7th, 9,100 on DraftKings, 13,000 over there on FanDuel.
He's another driver I think is going to go a bit over-owned today, and that's nothing bad to say about Hamlin. We know he is one of the top-level drivers at super speedways. He's averaging 41 DraftKings points per race, which compared to most drivers, that's really, really good. Average finish of 12.4. Also has 6 top 5s and 2 wins the past 11 races. So nothing bad to say about Hamlin besides where he's starting in 7th, because for him to pay off, he's probably going to have to get up front. He's going to have to lead some laps, and more than likely, he's going to have to win the race. And there's a decent chance of that happening. I'm thinking more so like 8 to 10% compared to where he's getting pulled in ownership. So I'm going to be underweight on Hamlin despite how good he is at these types of tracks.
No doubt about it. Of course, that's the Awesemo NASCAR Live Before Lock shows. We're getting you ready for today's Geico 500. And you may have noticed that F1 DFS has arrived on DraftKings. And of course, we have projections to help you take down some contests. Click the link in the video description below or use the promo code ZOOM at checkout to get your first week of F1 projections for only $1. That's right. First week of F1 projections for only $1 when you use the promo code ZOOM at checkout. This is a great way to test these projections out and determine whether you want to make this F1 a part of your DFS weekend. This offer is valid through Saturday, April the 30th. So that is next Saturday. Got to take advantage of that great promo we got going on for a first week of F1 projections for just $1. Use that promo code ZOOM. Now let's move into the mid-tier salaries here. So anywhere from the 8 to 6K range. So we got Brad Keselowski, Chase Briscoe, Kevin Harvick, Christopher Bell, Martin Truex Jr., Bubba Wallace, Austin Cindric, Ross Chastain, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Eric Amarola, Kurt Busch, Austin Dillon, Daniel Suarez, Chris Buescher, Michael McDowell, who we were both wrong on him last week, by the way. We did not see that one coming. Eric Jones, Harrison Burton, Daniel Henrik, Todd Gillian, and Ty Dillon. Let's start right there. The guy I mentioned first, Brad Keselowski. He's starting 15th, 8,900 on DraftKings, 12,000 on FanDuel. Anyone who's listening to you know how you feel about Brad, and this is a week where you're going to be looking at Brad.
Yeah, this is the time to finally buy back in on Brad Keselowski. He is one of my favorite plays in the slate today. Love him over on DK, love him over on FanDuel. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be said about Brad Keselowski. We know he's an excellent plate racer. If you're looking at his numbers at Dega, the best drive rating, the best running position. He is no longer with Team Penske, so we can't really just team up with those guys. But the Ford should be fast once again. If we watch Daytona 500, Keselowski was just, he looked super, super strong, and it seemed like he was wrecking just about everybody. And that's fine with me. If he wants to wreck everybody else, that's fine. As long as he's the last car standing at the end of the day, that works for me DFS-wise. And let's not forget, he had the 100-point penalty, so he's in a big hole. So he's going to have to be aggressive. He's going to want to get up front. It's just a matter of him staying clean or not, which is definitely a big if. But I do like Hess's chance today to put up a really strong day, and he's definitely one of, if not my favorite driver, starting inside the top 20.
And next up, we got Chase Briscoe. He's starting 17th, 8,800 on DraftKings, 9,700 on FanDuel. And a little bit earlier on in the chat, Eric says, how do we feel about Briscoe to be different? Is he enough low owned enough for where he is starting?
Yeah, he's a really decent pivot right off of Keselowski because he's going to pick up more ownership. And Chase Briscoe is a pretty solid plate racer. I mean, I wouldn't say he's quite Brad Keselowski's level, but he finished third at Daytona earlier this year. Finished 11th at Talladega last season, another 14th place finish, and actually has been fine at just grabbing good finishes. And if you're looking at the past 6 races for him, I guess his career in the Cup Series at Super Speedways, we're talking about an average finish of 14th with several top 15. So I think he's a nice pivot. Do I expect him to get up front and dominate like someone like Keselowski could? No, but I wouldn't be surprised if he squeaked inside the top 8, making him a decent play today.
Next up, we have got Kevin Harvick. He is starting 24th, 8,600 on DraftKings, 9,500 over there on FanDuel. And of course, when we look at the DraftKings side of the equation here, Kevin Harvick is going to be a guy that people are looking at because of where he's starting.
Yeah, he's not the prototypical guy that I roster at super speedways, but the more I look into it, he actually has been a lot better than I thought, especially at just getting good finishes. So the past 11 races, which is dating back just a couple of seasons, he has one of the better running positions. He's got 3 top 5s. And the one thing that really stood out to me is just getting good finishes. 9 top 20s out of the past 11 races. Like, that's very solid. Just keeping the car clean and ending the race, which is what you need out of these guys starting in the back. You don't need Kevin Harvick to win the race to be optimal. If he just stays clean until the end, finishes around top 12, top 10, that's a very good day for DFS purposes. I think he is cash viable. Not 100% sure if I'm going to get there, but he is certainly on my cash radar, and he is a good tournament play. And he's actually, I think, a pretty good pivot off of Bowman, because Bowman is going to carry heavier ownership, and I feel like they're very similar plays. And I kind of like getting more exposure to Kevin Harvick.
I feel like we can group the next 2 drivers together here because they're starting on the front row. Christopher Bell on the pole, Martin Truex Jr. starting second, 8,400 for Bell on DK, 8,300 for Truex on DraftKings, and then 9,000 for Christopher Bell on FanDuel, 6,500 for Martin Truex Jr. there. I mean, obviously, we kind of talked about this earlier about you're avoiding the front row just because of looking at the path to being optimal for these guys.
And there's basically no chance. I'm giving them about a 1 to 2% chance beyond the optimal lineup, and I just don't think it's worth taking any chance. Like, we're going to have so many things go right for Bell and Truex being optimal. And like I said earlier, we've seen where the guy in the front row wins the race, and they're still not in the optimal lineup. So I'm not really sure what else you need for me to tell you to not play the guy starting in the front row. And I mean, speaking about Truex, he's just not a very good plate racer either. So, and Christopher Bell, I mean, if you're looking at his 10 races at super speedways, he's got an average finish of 23rd. Martin Truex Jr. of 20.7. The one thing I will say about Truex is that he is dirt cheap over on FanDuel, and place differential doesn't matter as much. So while I'm completely fading him over on DK, I believe I have around 3 to 4% over on FanDuel. So nothing to write home about, but I do just have a little sprinkle there because of the super cheap price point.
I know one of the drivers that you had mentioned in your video earlier this week on the Awesemo YouTube channel was Bubba Wallace. He's starting ninth, but we've got a substantial difference in pricing. We're talking about DraftKings and FanDuel. While on DraftKings, he's 8,100. He's 11,500 over on FanDuel.
Yeah, over on DK, he's kind of like that third or fourth guy you can plug in your lineup. But if you're playing over on FanDuel, you almost have to build around him, which does not feel great on this slate. Heading into the weekend, I was going to be all over Bubba Wallace. The guy's an excellent plate racer. He's got 4 top 5s. He has a win. He actually won the most recent race at Dega. It was rain shortened. A lot of people don't like to count it, but it does count at the end of the day. And he's actually averaging around the most DraftKings points per race at plate races over the past couple of seasons. So no doubt about it, he's a good plate racer. I was looking at the most recent odds to win this race over in Vegas. He's actually tied for first with Ryan Blaney and I believe also Joey Logano. So he's getting a lot of love over there. I think the odds are a bit steep. I don't think he should be right up there with Blaney and Logano and those kind of guys, but no doubt about it, good play ratio. The problem is he's starting inside the top 10. So when I was planning on getting to a lot of him, I'm kind of looking at the low 10s, low teens as far as his ownership today, but certainly a fine tournament play.
In terms of tournaments, an interesting play that you have mentioned to me, Austin Cindric, he's starting 18, 7,900 on DraftKings, 8,500 over on FanDuel.
Yeah, overall, once you factor in leverage and ownership and projections, I think Cindric might be my favorite play today because everyone loves Penske cars at super speedways. Everyone likes Fords. Everyone likes Blaney. Everyone likes Logano today. Well, do not forget about the third teammate, Austin Cindric, who won the Daytona 500. Looking at ownership projections, doesn't seem like he's going to get too high, but I think that's a mistake. I mean, you can make a case he's a better play than Logano starting 5 spots further back, and I don't think him or Ryan Blaney are too much of different plays. We're talking about a massive price difference and a massive drop in ownership. So I'm loving the leverage we can get on Cindric. If we expect Penske to get up front, Cindric is going to be one of those guys, and I don't think a top 5 is out of the equation. So I'm loving Austin Cindric today on both sides.
Next up, you got Ross Chastain. He's starting 19, 7,700 on DraftKings, 6,800 over on FanDuel. And there was a question in the chat from Andrew. He goes, the real question is, does Ross Chastain troll everyone today? I've lost that coin flip for like a month and a half.
He certainly could. Chastain's an aggressive driver. You know, back in the day when he was in junk equipment, he'd ride around the back and take his top 20, which is all you needed from a 5K Ross Chastain. It's a little bit different these days because he is certainly someone that can get up front, get aggressive, and contend for wins. I mean, he finished second at Atlanta earlier this season. I think he's a fine play. I would rather get the Cindric personally. I just like his teammates a lot better, and I think he's going to team up with them. Chastain, obviously, he's a wild card. He could certainly win this race. We know how good he's been so far this year, but he's one of those guys that feels almost like he's going to be wreckers or checkers. So obviously better suited for tournaments, but he's still a fine play nonetheless.
And when you talk about wreckers, brings to our next guy, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., starting 26, 7,600 on DraftKings, 7,500 there over on FanDuel. If you have played NASCAR DFS in the past, you know risk and reward with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. And
it's definitely been not rewarding the past like 2 or 3 months now. I don't think he's had a good race this year. I don't think so.
Daytona, I want to say he pulled up a good number.
Did he? And leading into that, Talladega, another super speedway. That was so far long ago. I don't remember exactly how he finished. I can actually pull it up. So Daytona this year, Ricky finished 28th. So, and he finished 31st at Atlanta. It's been rough going for Ricky Stenhouse Jr. The thing is, he's got a lot of upside at super speedways. He's starting 26th. And at Atlanta earlier this year, he was up front. I believe Brad Keselowski is the one that ended his day. Like I was talking about earlier, Keselowski was just going on a rampage throughout the field, but Stenhouse has legit race winning upside today at Talladega. This is a very good track for him. He's got one of the better average running positions and he's going to be a contender. The problem is it's either going to be records or checkers, most likely for Stenhouse. And it seems like more often than not, he ends up being in the wall at the end of the day. So you got to be careful with him, but it's hard not to like him starting in 26 because he could honestly gain you around 20 spots today.
Yeah, I was looking at it was the Wise Power 400 there at Auto Club, where he had finished 10th, where he scored 41.5 points at a salary of 5,600. So, and mentioning about a question related to two of these drivers we just kind of talked about, Chuck Nasty over in our Discord chat said, Cindrick or Stenhouse, last piece, FanDuel Cash.
FanDuel Cash. For me, if it's cash games, Stenhouse is the safer option. Over on FanDuel, my single entry lineup has Cindrick in it, but if it's cash games, I would side with Stenhouse.
Okay. Next up, we got Eric Amarola. He is starting 23rd, 7,500 on DraftKings, 7,300 over there on FanDuel. Kind of similar ownership with Stenhouse.
Yeah, I think he's the safer play between the two. I mean, back in the day, not that it was too far back in the day, but Eric Amarola was a guy that everyone loved playing at Talladega. I believe there was a point where he had like 5 top 10s and 4 top 5s the past 6 races here. That's gone down a little bit, but he is still a contender here at Talladega any single time that it's on the schedule. It's just hard not to like him. He finished 5th at Daytona. He's starting 23rd. If you want to get away from the riskiness of Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Eric Amarola is a pretty nice pivot and feels a little bit safer, even though he's starting a couple of spots further up.
Now, when we look at the next 3 drivers, are 3 drivers that are just not getting ownership. Yeah. Kurt Busch starting 6th, Austin Dillon starting 14th, Daniel Suarez starting 4th. So Kurt is 7,400, Austin 7,200, and Suarez is 7,000. Obviously, with Suarez, he's starting 4th, and so it kind of becomes that what is a true path to becoming optimal.
Yeah, between these 3 guys, I am not playing Kurt Busch. I am not playing Daniel Suarez. The path for them to being optimal is they basically have to win the race. Because if this was a different style of race where pricing matters, if they could lose a couple of spots and still be optimal. At the end of the day, the Talladega kind of race, it's going to be the top 6 scoring drivers. And for those guys to be optimal, they're going to have to win. They're going to have to lead laps. I don't think the chances of that happening are high enough to even warrant wanting to roster them. As far as Austin Dillon goes, he is the one guy I am getting to in tournaments. I do think he's kind of a sneaky play today. He's a pretty good plate racer. He's got 3 top 10s the past 11 races at them, also has 6 top 15s. And he is a winner at a super speedway before in the past when he won at Daytona 500. I think Dillon's fine, but the other 2, Kurt Busch, Daniel Suarez, I'm just Xing out.
Now, a driver people are definitely not Xing out today is Chris Buescher starting 30th, 6,900 on DraftKings, 7,000 over there on FanDuel. Obviously, he's a popular play today. What's your thoughts on him today?
Yeah, Buescher's probably my favorite play overall today. I may even go as far as say I like him over Chase Elliott. It's just he is so good at the super speedways. I mean, past 11 races, he's got an average finish of 13th, running position not too far behind. Like, he's not someone that waits around for wrecks and then just gets a good finish. He's able to run up front and kind of stay up front. He's just good at getting good finishes. I mean, 6 top 10s past 11 races. That's about a 50% success rate, finishing inside the top 10. And you're getting him at a good price point on both sites. And he's starting all the way back in 30th. Cash game staple for me and just a good tournament play too, because I know he's going to be chalky, but I like to be overweight on him.
Next up, we got Michael McDowell, who is starting 21st, 6,800 over on DraftKings, 6,000 over there on FanDuel. He was just a guy that I just was not on last week, and man, I paid for that one.
Yeah, he certainly did. He had a surprising race, that's for sure. But I think he's in store for another good day. And if you don't want to get on that Chris Buescher chalk, you can obviously play both together. It's no problem. But Michael McDowell's not getting a ton of love this weekend. But if you're looking at him and Chris Buescher's super speedway numbers, there's really not that much of a difference. I mean, McDowell's got 3 top 5s, 4 top 10s. They both have the same amount of top 15s and top 20s. Average finish not too far behind, both averaging similar DraftKings points. He's starting 9 spots further up. So yes, there is more risk, but Michael McDowell is a pretty good tournament play today. So don't leave him off your list today.
James goes, what is too much money to leave on the table? Look, you can leave a good amount of money on the table. I mean, it's how I think for me, this is just for me. It's about, okay, if I'm in a big field tournament, I'm trying to figure out how do I get myself different? I mean, and there's certain ways that are clearly easy to get away from. Like if you say, hey, I want to get away from the chalk of a Chase Elliott, a Ryan Blaney, or someone like a Chris Buescher, you can get pretty unique pretty easily.
Oh yeah. Like you don't have to just deliberately leave money on the table to get different today. If you just take off the top three, like you talked about, and you build around, like, just say you take those three off, you don't even play Bowman, you build around guys like Chase Briscoe, Bubba Wallace, Cindrick, you're different enough where you can use a good chunk of your salary and still be different in tournaments. But as far as how much money you can leave on the table, do whatever you want today. Like, I don't care what the money is left over. We've seen instances before where there's like $20,000 on the table at a super speedway. So do whatever you want. As long as the lineup follows super speedway rules, you should be in good hands.
Next up, we got Eric Jones. He is starting 16th. He is 6,600 on DraftKings, 4,800 over on FanDuel.
He's another good turn play, kind of doing him similar to Michael McDowell. I know he's no longer with Joe Gibbs, but Eric Jones has some real upside at super speedways. Finished 14th at Atlanta, 9th at Talladega last year, 12th at Daytona last season. He can be a bit aggressive and kind of hit or miss, but I like the upside. And over on FanDuel, he's below $5,000. He is not a 4,800 driver at a track like Talladega. I think he has top 10 potential, sneaky top 5 upside. And I mean, he's not going to get too owned because of where he's starting. And I like being a little bit overweight.
Next up, you got Harrison Burton, who's starting 25th, 6,500 on DraftKings, 5,800 over on FanDuel.
Yeah, so a small sample size for Burton, but it hasn't gone too well for him in the Cup Series, the super speedways. Average finish at 28th, running position, not too far behind. But you can't forget Wood Brothers' car is kind of like that Ford Penske car. And if he can team up with his, not teammates technically, but Cindrick, Blaney, and Joey Logano, like we've seen MDB do in the past, I think Burton is a solid play down low. He's not picking up a ton of ownership. So while he's not my favorite play, wouldn't play him in cash games, he's kind of similar to McDowell and Jones that make them pretty good tournament play today.
Then you got Daniel Hemrick. He is starting third, 6,300 DraftKings, 4,500 on FanDuel. Yeah, just it's tough to get there because he's starting third.
Yeah, and again, it could be different if this was a different type of track where it's okay if they lose some spots, but you got to be a top 6 scoring driver to be optimal with this type of track. And Hemrick has to win the race. He's going to have to lead laps, and I just don't see it happening. So he's a cross-off for me.
Then you got Todd Gilliland starting 32nd, 6,200 on DraftKings, 4,200 over there on FanDuel.
Yeah, I typically like these front row motorsports cars at super speedways. His teammate Michael McDowell has a great history at them, and I think Gilliland's going to be fine. He's starting in P32, not much downside for him. If he just gets the top 20, that's a really good day over on DK. FanDuel, I always like the scrubs a little bit less because place differential isn't as important, but over on DK, Gilliland's a very solid play today.
Then the final driver here in the mid-tier will be Ty Dillon. He's starting in the 20th position, 6,100 on DraftKings, 4,500 over there on FanDuel. And I know he's been someone that you've talked about this week.
Yeah, I was hoping he was going to qualify a lot further back because he's typically someone we get around the 30th place range. Starting in 20th, this might be a blessing in disguise because this makes him a pretty solid tournament play because not a lot of people are going to want to click on Ty Dillon's name. But this is the guy at Talladega, past 6 races, 4 top 20s, 2 top 10s, has a top 5 and 3 top 15s. Like, he just knows how to get the job done at super speedways. He can ride around and just grab a good finish and keep it clean. So while he's starting a little bit close to the front, ownership's going to be low and it makes for a decent leverage spot.
Of course, this is the Awesemo NASCAR Live Before Lock. We're getting you ready for today's Geico 500. And of course, we are sponsored by Prize Picks, of course, so you can get 1 free month of Also Plus Platinum when you sign up, deposit, and play over at Prize Picks. You get an email within 24 to 48 hours how you can take advantage of that free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Of course, be sure to use that promo code Awesemo for an instant first match deposit of up to $100. So I will tell you, Chris sent me over some Prize Picks plays yesterday. One of them was under the lap sled of Christopher Bell. At that time, it was 26.5. Apparently, everyone got the memo of playing the under on that one. That was 21.5. But there is another one on lap sled that you mentioned to me. And that's Joey Logano. While that number has gone up from 9.5 to 11.5, still somewhere in the general range here for an overplay.
Yeah, I love the Penske cars at Talladega and Daytona. They always seem to find themselves up front. Now, it could be Blaney that leads a large chunk of the laps. It could be Logano, could be Cindrick. I wouldn't be surprised if it's Logano. He is starting closest to the front, so I think it makes sense if they kind of train behind him. But he is averaging 25 laps led per race here at Talladega. He's one of the top-level dominators at these types of tracks. 11 laps led. 9 looked a lot better. 11 a little bit higher. But it still shouldn't be a tough task for Logano. Like, he's up front just about every single time. So, and it's the problem with Logano at super speedways is that he usually wrecks at the end. So just getting the lap sled points instead of the over on fantasy points, it seems a bit safer to me.
Another one, and this prop actually has not changed at all, and this is cars past. Kyle Larson is a -6.5.
Yeah, and we were talking about it earlier. I mean, he has an average finish of 35th here. He's just not had a good time. He's got an average PD of -25.3 here. I mean, some of these, obviously, they're not his fault, but he just has a bad history overall at not being a good super speedway racer. Like so far this season, 30th at Atlanta, 32nd at Daytona, and then last year, 37th at Talladega. He's going to have to get like a top 11, top 12 here, and I feel pretty comfortable that he's not going to do that.
Of course, be sure to play over there at PrizePicks. Get 1 free month of Also Plus Platinum when you sign up, deposit, and play over at PrizePicks. You'll get an email within 24 to 48 hours of how you can redeem your free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. So let's take a look at the lower tier salary drivers here. So this will be everyone below 6,000. So we got David Reagan, Justin Haley, Cole Custer, Noah Gragson, Corey LaJoie, JJ Yelly, Landon Castle, who, by the way, has a pass-through penalty, Greg Biffle, Cody Ware, and BJ McLeod. So let's start there with David Reagan. He's starting 36, 5,900 on DraftKings, 4,200 over on FanDuel.
Yeah, as far as like the junker cars go in the back, David Reagan is my favorite. I mean, he finished 8th at Daytona. He finished 18th at Atlanta earlier this year. He's just a solid super speedway driver. I believe he's got an average running position. He's had the top 20 here at Talladega. I mean, it's hard to trust these guys with bad equipment, but even if there is not a bunch of wrecks here at Talladega, like if this was a clean race, I still think Reagan could contend for a top 25 finish, which at $1,500, he's like, out of all the, like, not counting like Custer, Gragson, and LaJoie, because they're not complete junk cars, David Reagan is currently my favorite.
Justin Haley, he's starting 11th, 5,800 on DraftKings, $5,000 over on FanDuel.
Yeah, I usually like Justin Haley at super speedways. The problem is he's starting 11th now, so it's kind of a bit of a cross off for me. Not completely. I have around 4 to 5%. I think he's a better play than the Daniel Hemricks, Daniel Suarez of the world, but he's going to be low owned. So I will say it's a leverage spot, but I think it's for good reason that he's going to be low owned.
Next up, we got Cole Custer. He is starting 29th, 5,600 on DraftKings, 5,500 over on FanDuel. And when we're talking about this lower tier, he's one of 2 drivers that people are really interested in.
Yeah, and I believe you said over on the top drivers tool that he has one of the best chances to be in the top 6, and that's just overall today, not just of the cheap guys. Custer looks like a really good play today. He's currently in my cash game build. It just doesn't need to do much to hit value here. He's dirt cheap. I'm not sure why he's cheaper than Haley, Reagan this way. It just doesn't make too much sense to me. He's in a Stewart-Haas car, so it's not like we need a bunch of wrecks for him to pay off. Like, if there's no wrecks today, he could easily be running top 15. So I'm definitely all about Custer today.
Next up, we got Noah Gragson. He's starting 31st, 5,400 on DraftKings, $4,000 over on FanDuel.
Yeah, so he's in the 62 car for Beard Motorsports, which, if you guys have been playing NASCAR DFS for a while, that used to be Brendan Gaughan. He was always the free play. And if you just imagine this was Brendan Gaughan starting 31st, $5,400, I think we'd be all about it. Gragson did win the Xfinity race yesterday. He can be a bit aggressive, but starting in 31st, I mean, hard not to like. I mean, as long as he doesn't wreck, he's going to gain spots.
Next up, you got Corey LaJoie. He's starting 33rd, 5,200 on DraftKings, 4,000 over there on FanDuel. He has a driver that people are getting to on DraftKings, but not getting to on FanDuel.
Yeah, LaJoie's like a super speedway darling where he just knows how to ride around the back and gets his good finish. He's not out there to try to win the race. I mean, at Atlanta, he did finish 5th. Like, I'm sure he'd love to win the race, but he's pretty content with just getting good finishes, like 5th, 14th, 22nd, 17th, 22nd, and 9th. He has been excellent the past 6 races of these. He's actually averaging some of the most DraftKings points per race of super speedways, and an average finish of 15.4. I have no problem at all with him. He's kind of like that cheap, boring play, but that's all you really need down low. So
then we got JJ Yelly. He's starting 38th. He's at even 5,000 on DraftKings and even 4,000 on FanDuel.
So this is where we start getting into like the complete scrub group after Corey LaJoie, where you're probably going to need some wrecks for these guys to pay off. I think Yaley's fine starting in 38th. I mean, he's got an average finish of 31st at Talladega. But if you don't think there's going to be a ton of wrecks, I'd be kind of low on these guys. But I mean, they're fine PD plays in the back. I'm not going to play them in cash games, but I mean, if you're playing these guys like completely in the back, you're hoping for wrecks and carnage, which is certainly possible at Dega.
Then you got Lancaster. He's starting 39th, 4,900 DraftKings, 4,000 over there on FanDuel. And of course, we noted that he does got that pass-through penalty. And there was a question earlier basically saying, hey, is it because that pass-through penalty, is he just someone to not play?
I'm actually kind of glad he got the pass-through penalty because I like Landon Castle at super speedways. It's not like he's anything too exciting, but he just knows how to ride around, grab a good finish. Like good finish relatively to where he's like priced. But I believe I read a stat where he's like out of all the laps he's ran at super speedways, he's finished he's been on like the lead lap for like 92% of them. So he's just fine at riding around, which is all you need if the guy's starting dead last. And a pass-through penalty is not necessarily a terrible thing here to track like Talladega, even if it goes a lap down and loses the draft. As long as there's wrecks, you're not playing Castle to get a top 10. Like he'll pass all those guys that wreck over time. And with the pass-through penalty, it's going to lower his ownership. I mean, if he didn't have a pass-through penalty, people would be even more so on Landon Castle. So I think it's a pretty good thing for tournaments.
And just check Bob's Twitter. No other changes in terms of anyone going to the rear. So right now, the only thing is Landon Castle with the pass-through penalty. Then I guess we can kind of group these last three drivers together. Biffle, Ward, and BJ ranging from 48 to 4,600 on DraftKings. I will say this. I unchecked them all in. I did not want to get to any of them.
I didn't quite uncheck them, but I'm pretty close to it. Like just looking at some of my exposures, I have Cody Ware below 3%. I have McLeod at 3%. I don't have any Biffle, but he's the one guy I worry about just like an equipment failure. I'm not sure how long Biffle is going to last in this race, but I only have a little bit of percentages to Ware and McLeod just in case it's a complete wreck fest and they'd luck into a top 20, top 25.
Of course, if you got any questions, be sure to line those up in chat. We'll be here for another 20 minutes answering whatever questions you have here on today's NASCAR slate. We just kind of go back up to the top of the chat. We'll get some questions that we've not had a chance to get to this point at this month. If for people who are just joining, I know this is probably gonna be a question of how much is too much on Ryan Blaney. Kind of give the people your thoughts on that again.
Yeah, so Ryan Blaney, while he is a very good player, he's great play on paper. I mean, he's great at Talladega, great at super speedways. The problem is, it's not like he's starting 35th where there's basically no downside. You guys remember the Daytona 500, but Joey Logano starting pretty much mid-pack, similar to Ryan Blaney, and we all know Joey absolutely excellent at these types of tracks, but he got into an issue where he finished around the mid-20s and not making him a great play. Obviously it can happen to Blaney. I mean, no one's invincible here. I do like him, but I am not going above 40% in Blaney today. You can be aggressive and do that, but going over around 40% anybody at a plate race is pretty bad strategy most times, unless we get like a unique situation.
Next up, we got Matt says, I have Ty Dillon popping on my model, but would you consider him in your cash lineups?
I like him as a tournament play. Cash games, I just don't see a need to do that because he's going to be pretty low owned in cash. And in cash games, we're not trying to be the smartest guy in the room. We're just kind of eating the chalk and just trying to be half the field. I mean, starting 20th, you have Reagan starting 16 spots further back. You have Gillen starting 12 spots further back. I don't see the need for Dillon in cash.
Eric Amarola or Ricky Stenhouse Jr. So they're right next to him. I mean, there's only $100 difference between these two guys.
Yeah, this is about the toughest question on the slate. I was getting some of this earlier, and my exposures are 2% different on these guys, and it's a very slight lean to Stenhouse, so I guess I'll side with that, but they're kind of the same play today.
Next question, I think I can answer this one for Chris because I know the answer. But Harvick, Truex, or Bell, last spot, who do I take? I think we all kind of know who your answer is going to be, but I'll let you say it.
Yeah, it'll be Kevin Harvick. I am not touching Bell or Truex. There's no need for that.
Yeah, I mean, and you've mentioned about avoiding the front row because we're talking about that path to being optimal and how difficult it's going to be where they're starting.
Yeah, and if we're looking at the history of – so the guys starting – first and second at Talladega, it's just they're scoring negative 13.3 place differential spots per race. The guy in second, not too far behind, negative 22.7 place differential spots per race, and they're in the deep red when it comes to fantasy points scored. There's just not a lot of upside. And even if they do win, that doesn't mean they're going to be a better play than some of those other guys that gained a ton of spots. Like for Harvick to outdo Truex or Bell, a very easy path for Harvick. And I understand trying to get different in tournaments, but there comes a point to where you're kind of just making bad choices to get different. And I think those bad choices are guys like Bell and Truex.
And the mentality today is about stacking the back. And when you think about, there's just not enough dominator points out there. It's only 131.4 dominator points out there. I mean, that's why you sit there. Like when you look at, like when I look at our top driver tool, if you're an Awesemo Plus member, the one thing that, you know, I'm primarily, I play on DraftKings. So I play a little bit on FanDuel, but primarily I'm a DraftKings player. I'm looking at that top 6%. And it's not there for either one of them.
And the thing is, the dominator points, they're even less, like you can't project all the fast laps, because the fast laps at a normal track, you can project those guys to the guys up front, typically picking up fast laps, which would be a benefit to Bell and Truex. But at a super speedway, since everyone's drafting off of each other, the fast laps are completely random throughout the field. Like it could be the guy in 30th place, it could be the guy in 14th. So when you take those fast lap points away, it gets even worse because lap lead points are only worth a quarter.
Yeah. Mention a question from over to Score from Jets World. He goes, playing high dollar single entry on DraftKings, any core plays?
So if it's a single entry, I mean, besides the obvious chalk of Blaney and Elliott, I think you should try to get at least one of those guys in, because it's high dollar. So they're going to be like, you have to approach high dollar a lot different, because you can make some mistakes and get away with some chalkier plays over there. But for me, I like Austin Cindric a lot as like a GPP, because I don't want to make stupid plays in high dollar, but I think Cindric's getting weird enough to where he's not going to be complete chalk over there.
Thoughts on Brad Keselowski? We know how much you love him on a super speedway.
Yeah, Brad Keselowski's one of my favorite plays today. As far as tournaments go, absolutely love him. He is going to pick up quite a bit of ownership today, but I think it's for a good reason. I've been saying every single show, I'm only going to play Brad at pretty much super speedways, and I will stick to it. And he's starting 15th. It's kind of risky, but he also offers you enough place differential upside, and I would not be surprised if he wins the race.
FanDuel question about Bubba Wallace. We mentioned about earlier when we talked about him, the noticeable price difference between DraftKings and FanDuel. And you mentioned earlier about, it's like if you're putting him on your FanDuel roster, you're almost kind of building around him.
Yeah, so looking at some of my sims here, Bubba Wallace is less likely to be optimal on FanDuel compared to DraftKings for me because of that massive price difference. The one thing I will say about over on FanDuel, while he's a lot more expensive, price differential is less important. So that high starting spot makes him kind of an easier play over there. But again, you have to factor in the price tag. But I do like Bubba in tournaments, but man, just $3,500 difference is really kind of tough to stomach.
Harvick, Cindric, or Bowman?
If it's a tournament, I'd go with Cindric there. If it's cash games, Bowman.
Let's see here. Thoughts on Noah? He won yesterday on the Xfinity, but he's bad in the Cup, though.
Well, we don't really have a large sample size of Gregson and Cup series, but I mean, he's in the 62 car. He's fine, starting not dead last, but he's pretty close to it in the 30s. He's just a fine cheap PT play to get not different down low, but just kind of differentiate your lineups down low.
Dan says, does it make sense to maximize salary while keeping super speedway rules as a strategy to be contrarian?
Well, I will say this weekend, I've been finding myself using more salary more often than I usually do, because some of these guys that are priced kind of high do offer a lot of place differential, like Bowman, Elliott, Blaney. So it's kind of easy to max out your salary. But as long as you're following the super speedway rules, I'm not really too worried about what my salary looks like. Just make sure you get your pivots in the middle somewhere, and I think it'll be okay.
Joseph would like you to explain the passer penalty, which I'm guessing what he meant by that question is the pass-through penalty that Landon Castle is going to have to do today.
So he failed tech 3 times, so he got his qualifying spot disallowed. So at the beginning of the race, he's going to have to go down pit road at pit road speed while everybody else gets to go as fast as they want around the actual track. So it obviously is a pretty big disadvantage to start, but at a large track like this, it doesn't really matter too much, especially at a super speedway. I believe we saw this with Daniel Hemrick at Daytona, I believe, to start the season. He ended up just fine. So don't be too worried if there's cautions, which there should be at Talladega. Landon Castle will be all right. And it's not like he'll be dead in the water like at a Martinsville or Richmond.
Next up, we've got Jay asking about how much Bowman, which I would perceive of, how high do you want to go? Let's just say you're playing in a 150 max.
Right. So for me, Bowman, while I do like him, he is a good play on paper. I'm a little bit underweight on him because I'm trying to get to more exposure of some of these other mid-range drivers, like an Austin Cindric, like a Keselowski. Bowman's gonna be really high owned. I'm currently sitting around 30%, which is a little bit underweight.
Next up, Joey says Castle, Harvick, or Reagan, and Stenhouse for cash. Not sure if he's asking for one of those plays. But obviously, David Reagan, we talked a little bit about him in terms of tournaments.
Yeah, if it's a cash question, I'm going to side with Harvick there. I know he doesn't have as much place differential upside, but if we're trying to eat ownership, he still offers you a lot of place differential upside. But all those drivers sound really good to me. But if it's cash games, it'll be Harvick.
Bowman or Logano on DraftKings?
I believe straight up, I have Logano projected slightly higher. Bowman obviously carries a lot safer before, but if you're chasing upside, I'll go with Joey there.
Next up, he says, first time playing NASCAR ever. Any advice for someone who's won 7 satellite tickets and dipping his toes in NASCAR on FanDuel, doing a bit of research this week about stacking and recent race history?
Now, if this is your first time playing NASCAR, you kind of came in at a crazy time because so what I would say is if you're playing tournaments, obviously you said satellite tickets, so some of you're in tournaments, you're going to have to find a way to get different. And this is the best track to fade chalk. So while Chase Elliott's an amazing play, Blaney's an amazing play, they can easily get caught in wrecks and you'll have massive leverage. So fading chalk at a super speedway is usually a good way to go about it. And one thing to keep in mind is don't get too happy, don't get too sad during the race, because me and Jason always talk about it looks like a roller coaster. You usually want to be losing money until the last lap is what you kind of want to aim for.
I have a rule. I don't always live by the rule. And the rule is once the race starts, I check my lineups. I'm just looking at ownership. That's all I'm looking at. Do I have someone that I think, hey, man, I think I've got a good leverage spot? And I always tell myself I'm never going to check my score during the race. Now, if I'm out and about and I can't be watching the race, I'm more looking at, say, please, God, hope no one wrecked. I don't want to see that red car flipped upside down.
Right.
Happened to me last week with Hamlin. Somehow still cashed. Amazing. Still cashed for that. But look, that's kind of a rule, but I don't always obey my own.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, even if your drivers are like near dead last during the race, as long as they don't have the upside down red car beside them on DK, that's fine. You kind of want them in the back near the end of the race. So like I always say, don't get too up or down. Just wait until the end of the race and then check your score, because nothing matters until turn 4.
DraftKings, Bowman or Logano? So obviously 2 popular plays today.
Yeah, I have Logano projected just slightly higher because of the high finishing position potential. If it's cash, Bowman, tournament, Logano.
Rick says, just getting in, Chris. FanDuel guys, please. Have to beat my son. Please help.
So for me, the guys popping the most over on FanDuel, top 3, Chase Elliott, only 12.5 over there. It's a good price point. Ryan Blaney, super expensive, but he's right up there as being a best play. And then Chris Buescher, price point looks amazing. And while I'm a little bit lower on Bowman just because of high ownership, he's really cheap over there and a pretty easy play to plug in.
I got Jordan in chat, bring being the grammar police over here. So you got to have that Grammarly. You get that rocking on your computer to help you out with that. JJT, are you getting to Tyler Reddick?
Not much. I have less than 10% Tyler Reddick right now. I think I might have a little bit more over on FanDuel just with the way their scoring works out, but he's kind of a high risk, not really a high reward guy. Like, yeah, he's fine starting in 10, but I mean, if you're playing Reddick at nearly $10,000, you kind of need him to come out and win the race, which I don't think it's worth playing over 10% of.
Apparently Chase wants you to accept a little head-to-head, so he's going to take you down. In terms of, like you mentioned about, like we talk about boom bust, no matter what sport we talk about, volatility is another word. Like, I mean, there's certain guys you can look at, but it's also one of these races of your guy could be just re-racing a clean race and just, unfortunately, it's just in the wrong position at the wrong time.
Yeah. Like every single driver here is a boom bust driver today. Like I mean, some guys are excellent at staying clean. Ryan Blaney, one of the best drivers at staying clean at super speedways, doesn't mean that he can't get clipped by a random Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Brett Keselowski spin at some point in the race. So you can't really classify anybody as boom or bust here, since everyone's got an equal chance of like wrecking out.
I feel like that's the prop bets. Who's going to wreck first? I am sure there is a sportsbook out there that has got that prop out there of potentially who's going to wreck first. And I feel like Ricky would probably have pretty high odds.
He'd definitely be like minus 10,000.
Hey, anyone who's played NASCAR DFS, you're well aware of it. I mentioned about some of my rules that I mentioned in Fantasy Cruncher, where I'm really just not trying to get to people in the top 10. And it's just because of, and particularly the top 5. For you, are you kind of in the same wavelength that I am?
Yeah. So for the first through 12 drivers, I usually set a rule of 0 to 2 drivers, and I am not really getting to any of them. I do have a little bit of, I don't have anybody in the top 6. That's Bell through Kurt Busch. I have less than 10% of Hamlin, Byron. I got a little more than 10% of Bubba, but outside of that, I am not heavily invested in the top 12 at all.
Yeah, I know when I did my crunch, it was I was getting to a lot of Chris Buescher.
Yeah, so
Buescher, Elliott, Bowman, and Blaney were the ones that I was just getting to a ton of.
Yeah, right now my 3 highest known are Elliott, Buescher, and Blaney. And then you have Harvick right below them, so we're pretty much on a similar path there.
DK cash question, 2v2, Blaney and Custer or Harvick and Amarola?
The Blaney and Custer one sounds better for ownership purposes and my projection purposes as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would go there as well because, as I'm preparing for this show and I create this spreadsheet that's like got all type of figures on it. And I highlight certain things that I'm looking at. And Nicole Custer was literally the only, when we're talking about drivers who are underneath 6K, he was the only one that I highlighted. It was just because of how he's popping in our top 6 percentages over on DraftKings. It's a core that I'm looking at. Obviously, I'm looking at ownership, and if I'm playing over FanDuel, I'm looking at that top 5 percentage. Of course, if you're also a Plus member, you get access to that top driver tool, which definitely does help you out a ton. Of course, if you sign up for an Also Plus membership, add on Fantasy Cruncher, add on Fantasy Cruncher. It'll help you out so much. It doesn't matter whether you're playing single entry, 20 max, 150 max, help you out so much. Our guy Phil checking in. Apparently Noah Gragson is going to the rear.
Good thing he was already starting there.
He is to the rear for unapproved adjustments.
Okay. Yeah, and if anybody has any questions about that, it does not change anything for me. I liked him before, like him. It's 8 spots. I'd prefer my guys in the back, really.
By the way, another little note here. So Denny Hamlin has a fill-in front changer today. Joe Gibbs' grandson, Jackson, will be working his first race. He's a former quarterback.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to think of a narrative that could work with that, but I'm not sure I can think.
You got a narrative for today outside of avoid the wrecks?
Someone told me in my chat earlier that Keselowski is going for some win with Jeff Gordon at Talladega. I didn't fact check that. They might have been lying to me, but if you want more reason to play Keselowski.
Okay, I saw something earlier this week. Was he going with the old school Jeff Gordon paint scheme? Or was that somebody else?
That's William Byron for Darlington. It looks pretty sweet.
Okay. Yeah, I remember seeing that on my timeline earlier this week. Next up, we got DK Cash 2v2, Castle and LaJoy, or Stenhouse and Bowman.
Stenhouse, I think you got to have Bowman and Cash today.
Yeah. Next up, Harvick and Custer, or Buescher and Bowman, FanDuel single entry.
Buescher and Bowman again for me.
Yeah. Let's see if I missed any other ones that have come in here. In terms of this one, of course, we're about to wrap up the show here. Any final things you want to mention before everyone starts rushing to set their lineups here for race starts in 20 minutes?
Yeah, just enjoy the race today. Don't be afraid to fade the chalk. And again, if you're someone like me that can't help themselves, but to watch their lineups throughout the race, even though you shouldn't, you want to probably be doing bad until the end of the race. If you're doing good at any point before that, there's a good chance your guys might get caught up in a wreck and it could go south pretty quick.
Yeah, look, you don't want to be an hour in this race to be in first place. probably not going to end up well for you. It's just the honest of NASCAR DFS. But do want to thank everyone for checking us out here on a Sunday afternoon. Huge thanks to our sponsor, Prize Picks. Be sure to play over there. Get 1 free month of also Plus Platinum when you sign up, deposit, and play over at Prize Picks. You get an email within 24 to 48 hours to redeem your free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. So that is going to do it for this week's edition of the Awesemo NASCAR Live Before Lock Show. We will talk to you again next week. Have a good Sunday, everybody.